So if there's one thing that Nintendo stays consistent at, it is surprising us with Nintendo Switch Online drops, because you never know when they're coming. You might think that we're going to go a long stretch of time without seeing anything, and then they turn around and drop a new batch of games. Some game updates are fantastic and very celebrated online. Other ones you could care less about if you didn't have any nostalgia for the games the first time around. And in today's video, we actually have to take a look at a great lineup of 4 different games that were just added into the base tier service, meaning that finally, yes, base tier subscribers who are paying $20 annually or paying their monthly subscription now have new content to play in the form of NES Mystery Tower, SNES Harvest Moon, look up the price of that one online, it's a big deal, and Game Boy getting Kirby's Tilt and Tumble and Blaster Master Enemy Below. But with this official reveal, I want to boot up those games together, share my initial gameplay impressions, and have a broader conversation on how this sets the floor for the rest of Nintendo Switch Online updates going forward for the month of June into July, even August, carrying us all the way through until that September Nintendo Direct that should feature some kind of updated roadmap schedule for new games and potentially even consoles. And we need to get on the same page with all of those details right now. What's up, nation? Make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification if you haven't already. And as mentioned, guys, today we are checking out the latest batch of Nintendo Switch Online updates, because you know that Nintendo has been wildly inconsistent with these updates, but every now and then they find themselves in a pattern of consistent surprises, and that's what we have today. We have Game Boy with 2 brand new games being, let me turn off my camera for a second so you guys can see behind me. So you have Blaster Master and you have Kirby Tilt and Tumble. Now this is actually my second time recording this video. I actually have some initial gameplay experience with these games because unfortunately the gameplay audio was not coming through. So anyway, that's a me problem, not a you problem, but I did have some fun and didn't realize that I was originally trying to play this with an SNES controller rather from the NSO shop. That is not the way you play it, because this game, it lives up to how its name sounds, which is Tilt and Tumble. So I don't know if there was at some point in time maybe a accessory that came into the Game Boy that will allow you to do the motion style controls, and that's how this game was playable, because I never played really any of these games in terms of whenever they were originally released. So this is all kind of a new experience to me, but I will say that I was very surprised by that, because I didn't expect to have something like motion control in a Game Boy game be a requirement. And maybe you can turn it off in the settings if you want, but I would say that this game feels like it's designed to be played with motion in mind, so that's how I've been enjoying it personally. Now, I don't know that, let's see, well, we didn't hit that last time, so I think this is just kind of early tutorial area still. But anyway, I do think that these are a solid batch of games, most notably Harvest Moon, which we will not actually boot up because it's a little bit more slow start on the story and everything. But I do think that in terms of games being added in there, if you look at that, the price point on the SNES and what it runs, and obviously, you know, it had a huge following on the DS as well, but if you want to play the original Harvest Moon, that's now added into NSO. And I think that that's kind of one of those talking points around how Nintendo has handled the base tier service updates so far. What we've seen them do is stick to a little bit more simple games, not necessarily ones that are licensed games that, you know, many fans are kind of ready to see, like myself wanting the Goof Troop games, Mickey Mouse, Star Wars, you name it. We haven't seen much of that, but one thing we have seen in terms of the update cadence around those games has to do with how they announce them. They always just shadow drop these games onto the service. So for Sega Genesis and for Game Boy Advance, or not Game Boy Advance rather, but for Game Boy and NES and SNES now that receive the base updates, those are the ones that you can always just kind of expect an announcement and they're playable then. When it comes to things like the N64 and the GBA, that is when you expect a week in advance announcement from Nintendo saying, hey, these games are on the way and you can play them normally a week after. Every now and then it's 2 weeks. In GoldenEye's case, even longer than that, I believe. Or that they just said coming soon on that before they gave us the final release date and everything. But anyway, I do think the N64, as we will hop into the next game here, you know what, we will actually play Blaster Master. So let's go back to our, hold please. game selection, and we will hop into Blaster Master next, which is another game that I didn't play. But I do think that when it comes to Nintendo and how they add in these games, there's some patterns that you can find. The biggest one being for like N64, for example. So far, we've seen really when Nintendo adds in Game Boy Advance on a certain month, they don't add in N64 and vice versa. So far, since February, since the service launched and we got initial updates in March, that's how it's been, and that's how I kind of expect it to go from here. So I do think that in the month of June, we will likely see an N64 update, which is needed in my opinion. I'm ready to play some 1080 snowboarding. I actually hope that that's the next one. I have a ton of nostalgia for that game. Granted, Pokemon Stadium 2, huge win. Mario Party 3 still on the way. So, we still got some N64 games that we know about out there. But I do think it's worth talking about that while we are kind of in this interesting time in Nintendo game releases, when we see games like Everybody 1-2 Switch, and that's the big June first party Nintendo Switch release, and then we know Pikmin 4, of course, is on the horizon in July, and then past that, we don't know anything. And, we could still get a Direct this month, although I'm not entirely sold on that idea. I actually think there's a solid chance we're waiting till September to really see Nintendo's bigger release schedule revealed. And whenever you start to think about that, you realize that they really could go double down on NSO and give us even more updates than what we've historically seen. And I think that would be a smart move, because it would kind of offset some of those lacking first-party Nintendo games that we see in terms of new releases on the Switch right now. Because naturally, as we get closer to the end of the Switch's life cycle, developers are going to have to develop for the true next-gen console. I think that's what's kind of going on here. But I don't know if this is just a landmine or something that I actually need to go get. But I do think that this is the perfect time to see a little bit more love and support for NSO, and I also think that an N64 update this month is highly likely, especially considering that these dropped very early into June, so it doesn't seem like a stretch for them to turn around and maybe announce an N64 game next week and say it's coming the following. We're still in the very beginning part of June here, so I do like to see an update this early into the month. We're not sitting here towards the end wondering if we're going to be getting anything in terms of NSO content at all. And then Sega Genesis, on the other hand, is kind of always just random updates. It drops in 4 or 5 batch games at a time, sometimes only 3. But that's kind of anybody's guess in terms of when those get added in. I can't, other than maybe once every other month, but not even that. You can't really say that they've had any kind of consistency on the update schedule necessarily with Genesis so far. But with that, before we continue our conversation, we will hop into the last game we're going to check out and boot up today. Lastly, we'll take a very brief look at Harvest Moon, not really doing much in the way of actually progressing the game, because of course there's kind of a period where you have to, I believe, just talk to NPCs, get different items from them, and essentially, start your farm. But this is one of the more notable additions, in my opinion, in terms of just being added into the SNES library, because again, it's one that if you look up the price point around, it is $400 easy on the SNES version. It clearly is one of those kind of like hidden gems classics. I guess you wouldn't call it a hidden gem. There's got a big enough following behind it, especially on the DS. I know a lot of people played it as well. One that, again, it's new to me. I never played this game once in my life, but I do think that, it's nice to see a game like this added into the SNES tier service. And you do have to wonder if maybe Nintendo will start to get more aggressive and pay some of those bigger licensing fees. Get games like the Mega Man X games. Granted, Capcom likes to resell those in collections and things. Get Goof Troop on the SNES. Get the Mickey Mouse games. There's a number of different great SNES titles, and I hope that while we are kind of in this transition era to next-gen hardware of some sort, that, maybe Nintendo will really lean into that broader library of classic games that they have with NSO, and maybe we could actually see multiple updates per month for multiple consoles. If we get something like N64, like I'm expecting, because at least expansion pack tier has to have something, then we get something like Sega Genesis, and maybe even Game Boy Advance, we could be talking in a whole different realm of updates and the schedule around them. Granted, if you look at the history, I'm not going to get my hopes up for that. I am very hopeful for kind of, I believe, at the bare minimum, one N64 game this month as well. And then once we go past that, it'll likely be Game Boy Advance next month. And we're going to see them kind of stick to this rotating cycle, essentially, in terms of really what they will do with adding in new content. But I really do want to hear from you guys on whether or not you have nostalgia for any of the games that were added in today. Are you surprised, or are you let down? Are there games that you want on NES, Game Boy, and SNES that aren't there today? How do you feel about Harvest Moon being added into the SNES? And then also share with me whether or not you think we're getting additional updates in the way of something like an N64 game this month, or do you think that maybe this is all we're going to get for the month of June and that we will see expansion pack tier updates more like next month? And bonus question, what do you think is going to happen with the next Nintendo Direct? Do you think there's any shot that we're going to get it this month in June still, or do you think Nintendo kind of sticking to regular announcements and smaller Twitter drops like what we saw with Everybody 1-2 Switch is kind of what they will do until their larger September Nintendo Direct? So regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Go watch yesterday's video next if you haven't already, which is on screen right now. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.